Hi, good day, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar on navigating through cancer diagnosis and employment. So my name is Karine Gravel, and I work for Myeloma Canada as a project manager for education and patient services. Before I introduce you to today's speaker, I will just show you a few slides for some directions regarding the webinar today. Just bear with me for a second, and I will share my screen. You can see my screen, Mei Lin?
Yes.
Okay. Perfect. So our guest for today, Mei Lin Yee, she is a human resources executive, and she will be giving a lot of information about today's subject, but also answer to your questions. So just a few words about our sponsors. Without those ones that are listed that you see on the screen, it would not be possible to produce such webinars to educate our community of patients. Thank you. So as you can see, you have the two speakers on your screen. There is no way that we can see your camera for the participants, nor that you can activate your sound. So in order to send us your questions or comments, please use the Q&A option in the menu bar. So depending if you're on your computer, your cell phone, or your tablet, sometimes on your cell, if you want to go to your menu bar, you just have to swipe. So I'm giving you just a few seconds to locate that bar. And so we will use the Q&A option, and we will use also the polls, which are two simple questions that we will be asking you, and you will receive a pop-up window and with some answers there that you can pick. As I mentioned, so today's webinar is recorded. We do have a bunch of webinars that we did already. They're all available to you. So if you go on myeloma.ca, if you click on the resource tab that you see on the screen here, top right, you will be able to click on educational videos, and it will bring you to our YouTube page. You can go directly on YouTube and search for Myeloma Canada. As soon as you see our red flower, you're at the right spot. So you have a bunch of videos all related to myeloma. So the either treatments or managing side effects, meeting a pharmacist, a lot of educational material on there. And if you click on subscribe, what happens is you'll be notified by email every time we upload something new, which is kind of cool. All right, so I will let Mei Lin introduce herself and enjoy today's session. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Karine. Good morning, everybody. So as Karine mentioned, my name is Mei Lin Yee, and I am an HR professional here in Montreal. We're going to talk about how to navigate through your cancer diagnosis and employment. But before we do that, I think it's probably important that I talk a little bit to you about who I am, because I think it'll help put everything into perspective. So I am a lawyer by training, working primarily in administrative law, including labor law, for a period of several years before I decided to transition into human resources. I have about a little bit more than 20 years of experience in human resources, growing through various roles into more executive positions in HR. In 2009, I was diagnosed with stage 4 cancer. I decided to continue working on a part-time basis through about 2012. At that point in time, it became a little bit more difficult for me to work. So I had to go on to long-term disability. my employment relationship was ended, I went on to the Quebec Pension Plan disability. And then in 2014, my cancer treatments were stopped because I had no active disease. So I was in treatment for approximately 5 years. In 2018, I decided to go back to school. So I did a master's degree in law and health policy. And since graduating from that, I have returned to working in HR on a full-time basis, and I still remain cancer-free. So I thought it was important for me to really share all of that with you, because it gives me the perspective of not only knowing legally and on an HR level what the lay of the land is, but also I've lived the experience. So there you go. Karine, could we go to the next slide and see what we're going to talk about today? So we're going to take a look at how you should speak to your employer, discuss any choices. Whoops. Hello?
You're still there. We're
You
good.
see me?
Yeah, yes, we can. We can.
Okay, I don't see anything. Okay, sorry about that. Okay, so because I don't have the slides in front of me anymore, Karine, could you just read to me the rest of the agenda?
Sure, just hold on.
Maybe I'm so sorry. I don't know what's happened to my
computer.
When
I opened up the question panel, it disappeared for you. Let me reshare again, just in case. Do you see it now?
I think it's my computer. I'm so sorry. I can hear you, but I can't see, but that's fine. I can continue. I can continue speaking.
Okay, so we have, as in the agenda, I can read it for you. Speaking to employers, we have, do you have choices? Discrimination in the workplace, and where to turn, I'm sorry, where to turn.
Perfect, thank you. I can see you again. Thank you so much.
Okay, perfect.
Okay, so let's go to the next slide and talk about speaking to employers. So the first thing we're going to look at is how to prepare. And really, I think that probably one of the most important things that you can do when you are communicating with your employer is to make sure that you are prepared. And I would say prepared to the point that you even know what it is that you're going to say before you pick up the phone or before you send out that email. So I would highly recommend sitting down, taking the time to put down in notes what it is that you want to address, what are the issues that you need to cover with your employer, and have that list available so that when you do have that communication, you don't miss anything, you don't get lost in the weeds, and you really ensure that you've communicated the information that you need to communicate at that time. Typically, the information that you're looking to communicate to your employer is usually information about things like timelines, what your physical and mental abilities might be at the time, and really other information that is specific to your medical file. I think it's also important that when you are communicating with your employer, you make sure that you keep it simple. Because, let's face it, talking about cancer is difficult. It's difficult for us as the patients to share information, but it's also difficult for the people on the other end. We're all human. They're your colleagues. They care about you. And so sometimes they don't even want to ask too many questions because they're just feeling awkward. So by keeping your communication simple, you've taken a situation that some people might feel uncomfortable in, and you're making it more comfortable for them. Many times HR departments are ill at ease and they're not sure what questions they should ask, and they're waiting to get information from you. So the more that you communicate in an easy to understand and comprehensive way, taking out all of the emotion, the easier it is for everybody else involved. And, I can tell you there have been many instances that I know of where the HR professional has hung up the phone afterwards and then said, I forgot to ask this question, or I should have asked that question. And they actually feel bad about calling you back because they're feeling that they're going to maybe upset or whatnot. So really just having your information there, keeping it simple, makes it so much easier for everybody involved. The other thing, what is it that you should be talking about? What do you need to share versus your right to privacy? So in Canada, we are extremely fortunate when it comes to our privacy laws. Not only do we have the Federal Privacy Act and the PIPEDA Act, so the Personal Information Protection and Electronic Documents Act, but every province also has its own provincial legislation that protects our personal information. But for you as a patient and as an employee, what does that mean? In short, what it really means is that any information that is related specifically to you, information that clearly identifies you as the subject of the information, cannot be disclosed without your approval. So that being said, what does it mean? It really means that your doctor, cannot share information about your medical file without your prior approval. In fact, I think it's the Supreme Court of Canada has declared that the doctor-patient relationship is the most private relationships in Canadian society. So when it comes to your medical information, you do not need to be concerned that your employer can just pick up the phone and call your doctor or call your hospital and get information about you without your prior knowledge or permission. They are not allowed to do that. And typically that's where, the third-party medical insurance companies come into play. They are the ones that buffer the exchange of information between your doctor and you as the patient and the medical caregiver to the employer, and they really control what information your employer needs to have and what information they do not need to have in order to manage your case. So I think it's really important for us to understand that our privacy is protected, and in fact, all of the third parties involved in maintaining your medical file have obligations to protect your privacy as well. And then if we take a look at, who needs to know. So here again, our privacy laws come into play. As I mentioned, you only need to share medical information that is relative to your ability to accomplish your work. You do not need to share your medical information with people outside of the individual at your employer who is managing your disability file. Typically, that's the HR department. Some companies might not have an HR department, so it might be the finance department, it might be, the office manager, whoever in your employer is dealing with the disability file on a whole. Can your supervisor call you and ask about medical information? No. Can your colleagues call you and ask you about your medical information? No. But that being said, sometimes we'll have our colleagues call us because they care about us, and they'll ask us something, and we share the information with them because we've become friends. And unfortunately, in certain instances, that medical information ends up getting shared and ends up becoming this huge situation that was not the case at all. I'll share something with you. In one instance, I was the HR manager, and the employee who was looking for a return to work happened to mention to a friend at the office, "Oh, I think I'm going to be coming back to work on date X." And that information had not been shared with the HR department yet. The next thing I know, we have people from all around the company calling HR and saying, "Oh, we hear so-and-so is coming back to work on date X." But the HR department hadn't even heard about it yet. And then unfortunately, date X ended up not being the case. And it just caused a lot of, back and forth for nothing. So, do you need to share your medical information with people above and beyond that person who's managing your medical file? The answer is no. And probably in some instances, I would recommend, even if you're talking with friends and whatnot, just keep it in the back of your mind that sometimes, that broken telephone can kind of come into play. And the next thing you know, people are hearing things about your return to work that aren't even actually the case. Can we turn to the next slide? So perhaps here we could look at running our two questions that we have in the poll, because I'd like to know, first off, what type of audience we're dealing with. And also I'd like to know where you are in your planning when it comes to returning to work. So we'll take a few seconds for that.
Perfect. So you should see on screen a pop-up window that just arrived on your side asking you, are you a cancer patient or a caregiver? So you have the choice to answer, I'm a myeloma patient, I'm a caregiver, or we are both a patient and a caregiver on this call today. Or maybe there's some professionals. The healthcare professionals are more than welcome to join. So I'm just going to wait a few seconds so that people can answer. As I mentioned, if you have a cell phone, sometimes you just have to swipe on the side to access another screen to be able to see it. I see people starting to answer. For now, I would say it's all patience.
Patience.
1 or 2 seconds more. Yeah, I think we all have patience today. Good.
Excellent. So, okay, so let's get back to whether or not you should stay at work or you should go on to sick leave. There used to be a time where working while you were undergoing cancer treatment wasn't even an option. This was primarily due to two specific things. Number one, the physical impact of treatments. And number two, the fact that, years ago, most cancer treatments were offered solely in the hospital setting. These days, as you know, with better management of side effects, and also the fact that more than 40% of current cancer therapies now are either oral or can be delivered at an at-home setting, we find ourselves in a situation where many, many cancer patients now have the opportunity of being able to work while they're in treatment. And in fact, if your side effects are managed well, and if your cancer is being managed well, your medical team might even encourage you to continue working while you're in treatment. So you might find yourself in a situation where you have options. What I do want to underline for you, though, is that any options when it comes to either continuing to work full-time or part-time, or stepping away from your job while you're going through active treatment, those decisions are not decisions for your employer to make. Those are simply medically based decisions, and they are discussions to be had between you and your medical team. Your employer should not be trying to push you in one way or the other. And in fact, your employer has no right to push you because they don't really know what your medical situation is. So I just want to make that clear to you, because I do know that in some instances, employers do think that they can, that they can maybe, I don't want to use the word coerce, but that they can gently suggest in one way or another, but they don't know what your medical status is. And it's really a decision for you to make with your medical team based upon what your actual situation is. Now, that being said, I think it is important, though, that when you are discussing your options with your medical team, that you really think about the big picture, and how either continuing to work or deciding to go on short-term disability or long-term disability might have consequences elsewhere. So for an example, I'm sure many of you know that once an employee has used up their disability benefits, either through their EI benefits or through their private insurance plan with their employer, the next step is to apply for CPP or QPP disability. And it's often at this point when employees go onto the CPP or QPP disability that the employer assumes, okay, this person is going on to permanent disability, and the employer decides to end the employer-employee relationship, which legally, yes, they do have the right to do, because the assumption is that you are now permanently disabled, even though that might not be the case. That was my situation. I ended up having to go on to QPP because I was in treatment for such a long period of time. I'd used up all of my private insurance, and the next step was QPP. My employer took this as a sign that I was going to be permanently disabled, and therefore they terminated the employer-employee relationship with me. When that happens and that employer-employee relationship is terminated, and should you find yourself afterwards able to return to the workforce, you might find yourself in a situation where your new employer is going to say to you, we can't extend short-term and long-term disability coverage to you through the insurance plan because you have a previously existing condition. So you need to take that into consideration. If you go onto long-term disability, and if your current employer decides to break the employer-employee relationship with you, and you know that down the road you will be able to go back to work, take into consideration the fact that should you have a recurrence with a new employer, that your new employer might say that you're not eligible for their disability program.
Could be the case. It could be the case, Mei Lin, for myeloma, because for sure it's an incurable disease, and we will experience relapses over time. So I would assume there's a lot of those types of situations there.
Yes, exactly. And if you have an employer who says to you, we understand the situation and we will not terminate the employer-employee relationship once you go onto disability, and yes, you can come back to work, that's great. But not every employer will do that. So, it's important that you keep that in mind moving forward, because you don't want to be in a situation where, then you don't have that insurance to fall back on with a new employer. Yes, you will have the EI, but the EI amounts, depending on the type of position you have, sometimes the EI amounts are really not sufficient. So just keep that in the back of your mind. I think it's really important. And then the other thing that I want to mention when it comes to being on CPP or QPP disability is the impact that it will have on your regular pension benefits once you hit age 65. So say, for example, if you go onto disability benefits with CPP or QPP between the age of 60 and 65, for every year in that age period that you are on disability benefits, your regular benefits at age 65 will be reduced by 6%. So if you are on CPP or QPP disability from age 60 to age 65, at age 65, your regular pension amount will be reduced by 30%. So that's a significant number. And I think it's important, when you're looking at say going from short-term or long-term disability onto QPP or onto CPP during that age, does it make sense that you be doing that? Or should you be looking at starting to access your regular benefits? And sometimes that would really mean, sitting down with your financial advisor when you're in that age group and looking at what the options are and how going on to the disability between age 60 and 65 might end up having this really important impact on your retirement after age 65. So just something to think about there. Karine, can we go to the next slide? So will I be judged or discriminated against? And I think here, it's really important for us to talk about the elephant in the room. I have to tell you, I never thought with a legal background and being an HR professional that my employer would decide to unilaterally terminate the employer-employee relationship, but it does happen. And, I think it's fair to say that unfortunately, the word cancer still can have a negative connotation around it in the workplace. And, I think it's normal for those of us living with cancer to be concerned about how this negative connotation might affect us. I don't say it does in every instance, but I can tell you there are still employers who, when they hear that word, automatically certain things come to their mind. And usually those things are unfortunately not about our well-being as an individual, but more around how the fact that somebody has illness will impact the productivity of the company. So this begs the question, how do we recognize discrimination? And discrimination really means being treated in a way so that you are feeling excluded in the workplace, you are being denied benefits that others have, or that there are other roadblocks or burdens that are put in your way so that you're not able to do your job properly. So examples of this might be that you're not given the flexibility that you need to go to your medical treatments while you're back in work. That's a form of discrimination. Discrimination might also mean that you're overlooked for a promotion for which you really have all the qualifications. That's discrimination as well. And at the same time, I think it's really important for me to point out that discrimination is not always intentional. There can be discrimination even when your employer does not realize that they're discriminating against you. An example of this might be that your manager decides to not offer you overtime work because they're assuming that you'll be too tired or unable to take on that overtime work, and therefore they ask somebody else in the team, when under normal circumstances, they would have asked you. Them making that decision about your ability without discussing it with you and then taking an opportunity away from you is a form of discrimination. When you see these types of forms of discrimination in the workplace, I think it's important that you bring them up to your HR department, particularly in the cases of unintentional discrimination. Because number one, you're helping to educate on what discrimination looks like in the workplace, but you're also helping your company to realize, okay, yes, we are inadvertently discriminating against somebody, and that's not our intention. I think, one thing that I need to point out is even though HR professionals exist, that doesn't mean that we automatically understand what discrimination looks like. And even your own HR department can unintentionally be discriminating against employees and not realizing it. So I think it's important when you see yourself or when you feel like you're not getting access to the same benefits and the same opportunities as somebody who does not have a cancer diagnosis. When you see that difference, it's really important for you to speak up and to point those out. But, when we do look at cases of deliberate discrimination, unfortunately, intentional, deliberate discrimination in the workplace based upon health status is quite frequent. So I think, though, it is fair to say that from what I've seen, this type of discrimination exists less when it comes to white-collar roles, but tends to exist more when it comes to blue-collar positions or more physical positions. And that's really because if you have a physical issue as a result of your cancer treatment, and this affects your output for the organization, then they're seeing this as a loss for themselves. So in many of these cases, patients find themselves to be victims of what we would call constructive dismissal. So constructive dismissal is when an employer deliberately and unilaterally changes the terms of employment with you, really with the end goal of trying to get you to quit your job. So examples of constructive dismissal might be significantly lowering the number of hours of work that you have per week, and not because you've requested it. Significantly changing your work schedule so that it's difficult for you to meet that work schedule. Putting demands on you that they didn't put on you before your cancer diagnosis. So maybe expecting a higher output from you or expecting you to perform tasks that are more complicated, are more rigorous, and that typically were not within the normal frame of your work. Or, as I mentioned earlier, refusing to accommodate you with time off for your medical treatments. These are all blatant examples of an employer who's acting in bad faith and who is trying to get their employee to quit. And these are all examples of intentional discrimination. Finally, I think it's important for us to talk about what future employers are allowed to ask and not ask when it comes to your medical history. So the only instance in which you need to share your previous medical history is when it may affect your ability to perform the job properly. If you fail to disclose your physical limitations when applying for a job, and you know that your physical limitations will make it difficult for you to perform the tasks, you're misleading the possible employer. And in those instances, they can refuse to offer you the position. So it's really important for you to be transparent with future employers and disclose to them any physical limitations that you might have that may limit your ability to perform the job. Now, obviously, if this possible employer has the opportunity to offer you accommodations, making it easier for you to perform the job, then that's great. But if they're not able to offer you accommodation, then, unfortunately, this is not a form of discrimination. So it's really important that you understand discrimination when it comes to your current employer compared to discrimination when it comes to a possible employer. The bar for discrimination with a possible employer is much lower than with a current employer. Could we go to the next slide? Whoops. Okay, so returning to work, what are your next steps?
Would you like me to start the second poll, maybe?
Sure, yes, great, thank you.
Okay, let's do that. Be prepared. Let me go back. All right. So what is your current situation? So on the call, do we have people that are currently working while they are in treatment? Are you on leave? Are you planning to go back to work? Or have you returned to work already? And I'm sorry for the first question. I think there was a second part of the question. That's why we had so much trouble submitting the answers, but I think we're good now. So I'm going to leave you one more second and share with you the results. We have all of them actually, Mei Lin. So I think on the video itself, we won't see the answers, but we can see a lot of people are still working while they are in treatment. Bravo, I would say. That's
yes,
good.
Excellent.
Just one person is on leave right now. 3 people are planning to go back to work, and 2 of them have returned already.
Okay, perfect.
All right. If you have at the very end during the question period, if you want to share your experience for those of you who have returned to work, maybe it would be something nice to see. Okay, right. Thank you.
Thank you. So I'm happy to see that there are people who are planning to return to work. So I guess, what I want to say about that is I really believe that educating employers on what cancer looks like in this day and age can help eliminate a lot of the assumptions and prejudices that are made when it comes to having a cancer diagnosis. And I think that they can also help eliminate many of the barriers to communication that often develop when employers and employees find themselves having to deal with medical leaves. I've already pointed out to you the importance of communication. Communication is extremely important when you're dealing with returning to work. And I think it's really important that you communicate several things with your employer when you're looking at returning back to work. And I think one of the primary things that it's essential to communicate is what your limitations are, whether they be physical, emotional, fatigue related, whatever. It's really important that while you are working on your return to work, you share that information with your employer. And when you're looking at evaluating your abilities, what I often recommend to people is that you take advantage of the resources around you. You might have a physiotherapist at the hospital, or social workers or whatnot, and ask them, be honest with them. Explain to them what type of role you have in your company, if it's a physical role, if it's a role with stress, if you're expected to do a lot of, calculations or long hours or whatever it might be. Share that information with the people around you who can help evaluate you, and ask them for their opinions. Do they think that you can sit at a desk for 8 hours a day? Do they think that you can be, standing for 8 hours a day? Whatever these things are, whatever the demands of your job are, look to these professionals around you and really seek their honest opinion. I kind of tell people, this is not the time for you to be a hero. You really need to be honest with yourself as to what your job entails, and be honest with yourself that, yes, you are ready to take that on. And if you see that you're not able to, do 3 half days a week or whatever it is, share that information with your medical team. Oftentimes, insurance companies, they have these sort of preset ideas as to what a return to work should look like. But everybody is not, a cookie cutter. Every situation is different. And if your medical team feels like the cookie cutter return to work schedule that the insurance company has put together does not make sense, they can push back on your behalf, and they can push so that the insurance company listens and changes your return to work schedule so that it's more realistic. Because if your return to work schedule is too ambitious, it's setting you up for failure, and that's not fair to you. So I think it's important that you be honest with yourself. You seek the opinions of professionals around you who can help to evaluate you. And if necessary, you get your medical team to push back at the insurance company or whoever else might be involved in setting up your return to work schedule. Because you don't want to be in a situation where your employer assumed that you would be able to accomplish this much in your day when you can really only accomplish this much. And then your employer decides, oh, well, we need to absolutely get rid of her. And the next thing you know, you're on the road to a constructive dismissal. So this leads me to the last thing that I want to discuss when it comes to your employer's obligations towards you. And that is their obligation to provide reasonable accommodation. Reasonable accommodation is a right that all Canadian workers have. And what it means is that an employee who has a limitation when it comes to their ability to perform their work, and that limitation requires the employer to make or to adapt the employment situation, the employer has the legal responsibility to meet the necessary changes so that the employee is not discriminated against in the workplace. So examples of this might be changing the layout of a workstation so that it becomes wheelchair accessible, providing an employee with on-the-job training so that they can perform tasks that are maybe less demanding on them, or changing an employee's schedule to better accommodate treatment plans. Now, while an employer might have an obligation to reasonable accommodation, and while all employees have this right, I need to point out that the right is not a given to 100%. If the accommodation requires the employer to provide something that is maybe a hardship to them, or meaning that it's very costly to implement, that it might cause danger to others because a setup needs to be changed in a way where it's causing safety hazards to other people, or the accommodation is just so costly that it doesn't make sense for the employer to implement it. In cases like that, where there is hardship for the employer, they are not required to provide the reasonable accommodation. And at the same time, employees also have obligations when it comes to their successful return to work. As I've mentioned several times, it's important that you communicate with your employer anything around your health status that might affect your ability to perform your job properly. Anything when it comes to your return to work timeline, any limitations you have, you need to disclose those things to your employer. And it is also important for you to clearly explain to your employer what type of modifications or accommodations you need to be able to get your job done. It's not for your employer to be guessing, how should we be setting up their workstation? You need to be conveying the information to them so that they can do it according to your requirements. And really, so in other words, you just need to provide your employer with as much information as possible so that the two of you can work together collaboratively to create a successful return to work. As I mentioned, your employer has the obligation of confidentiality, and you have the right to privacy. However, you still have the obligation to communicate, to cooperate, and to share as much information necessary to make your return to work easier on everybody and more successful. So that being said, maybe we could go to the last slide. And here I've just identified a few resources. I want to point out that cancerandwork.ca is an extraordinary resource. You can get tons of information that is pertinent in both a federal setting and also for the province of Quebec, because sometimes things in Quebec run a little bit differently. But Cancer and Work available, I believe, in both French and English. A lot of interesting information there. And also bloodcancers.ca, some exceptional information as well about how to speak to your employer. Cancer.net is a more US-based site, but there's still some very interesting and pertinent information that I would recommend you take a look at as well. And should you realize or suspect that you are a victim of discrimination in the workplace, we have, every province has its own organization that you can contact. In Quebec, it's la Commission des droits de la personne, so the Human Rights Commission, and all of the other provinces have commissions like that as well, as they do on a federal level. You can pick up the phone, call people, and they will talk to you and let you know whether or not they think that, yes, you are a victim of discrimination in the workplace and how to move forward with that sort of situation. And that's it. So I don't know if there are any questions.
We do have questions.
Okay.
I would start actually with something we just addressed a few minutes ago about, if we can go back, about the hardship that is being put on the employer. What would happen in that case? What's the next step? If they say, no, we can't accommodate you, would they offer a package? How does it work?
Right. So in some instances, they might say, no, we can't accommodate you. And you might be wondering in the back of your head and thinking, they're saying they can't accommodate me, but I know that what I'm asking is reasonable. And if you think that what you're asking is reasonable, that's when you pick up the phone and you call the Human Rights Commission, and you get information from them. Now, if it's really a hardship on the employer, then you are not quitting your job. They are unable to provide you with the accommodation. So they are terminating your employment, in which case you should be expecting a package. And there again, if you're having difficulty getting that package, call the Human Rights Commission. They will probably refer you to your provincial labor commission. But definitely in an instance when an employer is unable to provide the reasonable accommodation, and they're unable to provide you with a reasonable alternative position in the organization, they are terminating your employment, and they should be providing you with a package.
In regard to the CPPD and CPP reduction, your example was for age around 60. So if a person goes on CPPD earlier, let's say around the 50s, would the 6% reduction per year still apply to every year up to 65? How does it work? Can you just give more details?
Yes. So this is one of the reasons why I went back to work. So what happens is you're on the CPPD, and they don't tell you anything. They just, they're sending you your check every month. And then if you're still on your CPPD between age 60 and 65, it's when you get to 65 and you move towards the regular benefits that then they tell you, oh, by the way, you were on CPPD from age 60 to 65. So your regular benefits would have been this much, but we're reducing it by 30%. So now it's this much.
What if that person is 58? Those 2 years before 60, do they count, or it's a different story?
It's a different story. So every year up to age 60, they do not reduce your CPP, your regular CPP. But what they do from the moment you turn 60 to when you're eligible for your regular pension at 65, they calculate actually by month. So for every month, it's 0.5% reduction. So over a year, it's 6%. So yes, they calculate for every month, and that's it. So then you get this nasty information that your benefits have just been slashed by a significant amount.
I think it doesn't answer the question. Thank you. So our next one, duty to accommodate is an employee right. Hence, if the employer will not accommodate with a medical note, are they not violating the Human Rights Act?
Yes, they are violating. I mean, unless your medical note says something that, they absolutely cannot meet. If it's a requirement that they are able to accommodate and they are refusing to accommodate, they are violating the Human Rights Act.
Kathy, your question was still about the 6%. So can she explain the 6% and the 30% again? She is confused about 6 and 30%.
Okay, so it's 6% per year. So say, for example, if you're on CPP disability from age 60 to 61, and then you go back to work,
That's
The
6%.
fact that then it'll just be 6%, a reduction of 6%. Yes. If you are on CPPD until, say, age 63, then it's going to be reduced by 3 times 6% at age 65.
All right.
So I actually went back to work at age 59 because I said, no, I'm going to work from 60. Well, now you all know how old I am, but I said to myself, no, that 5 years at 6% per year is a significant amount.
But you were lucky enough to have the information, because a lot of us really don't know about it and learned it today, which is a good thing.
Yeah.
So thank you for the information. That's why we have those sessions with you. All right. So what is the least amount of hours to work? Oh, I'm sorry, it shifted. What is the least amount of hours to work to still receive insurance benefits?
So each policy is different. Usually your policy will define the number of the amount of time that you need to work as being more than 50% of the work week. So, for example, if you're working a 5-day work week, then they would say, you need to be working 3 days. If you're working a 3-day work week, they might say you need to be working 2 days. Each policy is different. You need to speak to your HR department and ask them. There are actually some policies that go as far as to say that it's so many number of hours. So if it's a 40-hour work week, they might say employees who are working more than 21 hours. But it's really individual to your policy, and it's 99.9% of the time, it's more than 50% of the work week.
I have a very long comment, and I hope I can read all that correctly. Sorry for my francophone accent sometimes. All right, so the comment is, I am back to work and have just started back at the gym. So I guess the gym is the workplace. I have disclosed my limitations and been very open with my symptoms, fatigue, sore joints, etc. The trainers really push, and some days my body just will not deliver what I needed to, but they still push really hard. I left the gym very upset on Tuesday, and I just couldn't push anymore. Now I am embarrassed. Oh, sorry to hear that. Embarrassed to go back and explain I need to do things at my own level. It's not a contest. That's a good point. How can I get them to understand?
So I guess I'm just not understanding the context properly. This is somebody who works at the gym and so is expected to be able to deliver classes, I guess, at the same level as the other trainers.
That's how I understand it. But
okay.
I think we can make it more general. First of all, what I understand from this message is that person cannot perform. Obviously, the employer is pushing to have that person perform. And so that person is embarrassed. And what we need to understand in the myeloma journey is, of course, you need to accept your new condition, accept your new you. That's very important, first of all. But maybe, Mei Lin, you can comment on during that those types of situation, the person is embarrassed and needs to I don't know if that place has an HR person to maybe ask for advice, maybe.
So I guess the first thing that I want to say is congratulations to you for going back to work. And there is absolutely nothing to be embarrassed about. I understand it, but I'm sure that deep down inside, so many people are just thinking how strong you are to be able to go back to the workforce like that. Yes, Karine, you're correct. Maybe there is an HR department that you can speak with. If not, then I think this is a good opportunity for you to sit down with whoever is managing the team or whatnot. And this is an opportunity for you to explain what short-term and possibly long-term limitations you might have. And perhaps you can suggest ways in which an accommodation for you can be met. So, for example, in the gym environment, if you're expected, I don't know, say if you're expected to lead a Zumba class, well, obviously you can't lead the class by doing the work, but can you lead the class by explaining what the steps should be? This is an opportunity for you to come forward with suggestions for accommodation, and hopefully your employer will understand that and then follow your example, follow your lead. So, if you're saying, look, I can't physically do this, but I can show, I can train by explaining how to do it, or I can train by showing how to do it once or twice. And then that should be enough. But I'm really not sure if I'm answering the question correctly. But, as I said, communication is important. And it's really for us as the patients to come up with ideas as to how we can be accommodated. And there's definitely no reason to feel embarrassed.
I have a good example for a gym. Let's say you were referencing to a Zumba class. Maybe it's more difficult to explain the movements for a Zumba class. Maybe it's time for that person to change to another type of class, such as HIIT, for instance, where you can put a board and you put the exercises and the time of each sequence, so it's easier for the teacher to not be involved actually in the movements. So maybe there's an adaptation there to be made. So I think everything is possible, but that person, I feel that it's the type of example that you were giving, like when you were talking about the employer trying to force you to leave. Mm-hmm. That's what I would think.
And if that's the case, honestly,
you need to address it.
Yes, you need to address it, and you need to start taking notes of everything, because should you end up, in front of the Labor Commission, it's important that you have dates and times and situations that took place so that you actually have a file. Although I hate when people get to the point that they have to become litigious when it comes to this type of thing. But I also have this mindset that if people don't speak up, this type of negative discriminatory practice just continues.
Correct. I have a very good question. As most multiple myeloma patients are immunocompromised, is it reasonable that a patient would not return to work based on the fact their job requires regular contact with the general public? That's a very good question.
So in an instance like that, what I would be expecting is that the employer says, we can provide you with a situation or with a job where you're not in constant contact with the public. That's what I would be expecting. The other thing is, if you're on insurance, private insurance, there may be a clause in the insurance policy that says that even if you can no longer perform your current duties, then you are required to accept any other duties that the company offers you that that are not affected by your limitation. So, for example, if you're dealing with the public on a regular basis and you can't do that anymore, and yes, it makes total sense that you can no longer be exposed like that. If your employer says to you, okay, we're going to give you an office job, it earns 10% less, and you need to take that job, you might find yourself in a position where, yes, you have to accept that because they've come up with a reasonable solution for you. And if you refuse to accept that reasonable solution, you're considered to have quit your job.
For instance, in case of that person at the gym, you're doing a class with a lot of people, you're in direct contact with them. Then they offer you to switch to the front desk and have those plastic glass that protect you from people. So this would be a situation where the person would need to make a decision, right?
Yes. And oftentimes what happens is, say if there's a reduction in salary, then say if that reduction is 10-20%, the insurance companies will say 10-20% is not so bad. You need to take that secondary position, and in the short term we will provide you with training so that we can get you into a role where you're back at the salary that you were previously earning. And they kind of put you in situations where you end up having to say yes. And that's oftentimes written in your insurance plan with your employer, and you would need to have your HR department look at those clauses with you.
All right. I think we're done, Mei Lin. I don't have any other questions. In any case, I remind you all that this session was recorded. So if you want to go back, there's a lot of information, we know, but you can go back, watch it again, take some notes. We do have those links on screen right now. So make sure you note them down once you go back to our YouTube channel to watch it for a second time. So you're more than welcome. And should you have any questions or topics maybe we did not address today and you want to have more information, feel free to contact Myeloma Canada at contact@myeloma.ca, and we will make sure to answer a question or pass it along to Mei Lin and give you the answers you need to accommodate you in any cases. So any final word, Mei Lin?
I just want to wish you all the best of luck in your return to work. And thank you for taking the time.
Thank you for your time. All right. Have a great day.